Good morning. It's great to see everyone. So as everyone knows, we've been started a series on parenting out of the book that's on the slide, In the Way We Should Go by Dr. Jeff Miller. And we've been taking rotations. Lee gave us the introduction, and then Jake Goza gave us the second lesson, and Steve last week, and I'm up. So my topic is the third chapter in this book, The Goal. The Goal in Parenting. Jeff Miller wrote the bulletin article. I noticed that Wayne put an article from Jeff Miller in regards to the Ark, because a lot of us are heading up to see the Ark exhibit south of Cincinnati next weekend, and we're excited about that. Jeff Miller worshiped with us last year. He was actually heading to Tuckaleechee Caverns to do research on cave formation and how the caves are actually formed very rapidly, unlike a lot of what kids are taught. They're formed extremely rapidly, and he was there looking at Tuckaleechee Caverns. Isn't it wonderful, talented men like this are out there defending the faith and so capably doing so. So, the goal, I put a target up here because that's important as parents to keep our eyes on the target. Keep our eyes on the goal. It's so easy when the world pulls us and we get distracted from the true goal of parenting. We may know it, we may verbalize it, but in reality, we take our eyes off the goal a lot. We need to constantly come back. What are we trying to do here? And make that just part of our daily rhythm of life. Tate saw this target when I was preparing the lesson yesterday morning, and he says, "Oh yeah." And he thought we were maybe going to go target shooting. And so that made me think. I'm like, no, the target is God. So I immediately asked him, "Tate, tell me something you learned about the Bible at Bible camp last week." And he says, "The Beatitudes." And he was able to tell me where it's located, Matthew chapter 5, starting at verse 3 through verse 10. I'm like, wonderful. And I said, that's the goal. That's the target. The heart of a child being reflected by what Jesus says your heart should be. The Beatitudes are a great place to start when you're wanting to shape a child's heart appropriately. And then yesterday in the car on the way back from fireworks, I don't know. It was late. Maybe it was somewhere yesterday afternoon. I heard Tate tell Matthew that you could just tell after church camp he came back really energized, and he says, "I see God in the trees, and I'm trying not to take it for granted." I wasn't part of that conversation, but it just really encouraged me that my 10-year-old was telling my 20-year-old these concepts that were going through his head. I felt like, that's great. He's aimed in the right direction in that moment. In that moment. Okay. The goal. Let's just start with a list. What are some goals, reasonable goals, that we as parents should shoot towards in our parenting? Shout it out. Respect for authority. That's absent in this culture, isn't it? Accountability, responsibility. Wow, that's something people run away from in our society, but we need to take on responsibility. That makes for a rewarding life, right? When you take on responsibility and meet a higher need. Very good. Obedience. Authority. Learn and obedience. A desire to go to heaven. Awesome goals. Humility. Choosing God before anything else in every situation. Humility, that's a tough one. Aren't we supposed to be about me, right? This culture tells us submission is a bad thing, not a good thing. Humility is, pride is really, they may not say pride's a good thing, but really that's what they're being taught, is that pride is, it's all about me. Very good. Conviction. Very good. So we've got a great list brewing here, and maybe I can sit down. It's nice to come together with people of like minds who have tried to conform to God's word, rid cultural influence, and say, no, that's not what I stand on. I stand on what God thinks a parent should be, what God thinks my goal should be as a parent. It's very different than worldly goals, right, for parents. What are some things the world teaches us to do as parents? Emphasize what? Sorry? Success. And of course, that's not spiritual success. That is the money, the career, the fame, the popularity, the number of followers on Instagram, or whatever it is. That's what the world is telling us. Grades, but if we're not constantly as parents focused on the goal, we can find ourselves in those conversations, right? Too often. If too many of our conversations are about get that good grade, got to get ready for, I've been very careful. I'm about to launch one of my three, the first of my three, off into the world, right? And I found myself kind of, have I prepared him for the financial side of it enough? And, it makes me want to get in there and kind of catch up a little bit and scramble, to teach him a little bit. And then I find myself, whoa. God will take care of him. He always has. You make sure you and Lucy are pointed in the right direction spiritually. That'll take care of itself. We have to keep reminding ourselves of the target so that we don't find ourselves overemphasizing a worldly point of view. Nothing wrong with having a successful career. We have to pay the bills, right? We want to get our kids off towards that target with momentum. I'm going to be skipping some slides based on how I feel the pace of the class is going, so forgive me for that. I'm also going to have to hit it here and here, so we're going to skip that one. What profit is it to a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul? If we inject parenting in here to this verse, what profit is there if our child gains the whole world and loses his soul? We want our kids to be successful in sports and school and eventually a career, but we must never lose sight of eternity. The choices we make in parenting have a monstrous impact. Parenting is an enormous responsibility. When we are given that newborn, we've just been given a soul that will never cease to exist. And we have first shot at it. That's mind-blowing. Sometimes I will sit there and wonder, God, why did you leave me with this responsibility? Why does he leave the church with the responsibility of sharing the gospel to the world? Souls, eternal souls are at stake. But again, back to what Curtis says, when we get responsibility, we get purpose in life, we get value. We are created in his image. What an awesome blessing to be given this responsibility. It makes life very meaningful, knowing that God entrusts us with a soul that will live for eternity. The very first time parenting is mentioned in the Bible, many of us, if we were just asked that, we would probably think, well, Genesis 4, when Adam and Eve had a kid, right? But if you look at this verse, Genesis 2:24, interesting, but think about where this points a parent. The very first time parenting is mentioned in the Bible, it says this: this is why a man leaves his father and mother and becomes attached to his wife, and they become one flesh. The first time parenting is mentioned in the Bible points to when we release them. I think when we parent, from day one, our target must be keep the end in mind. Keep the goal in mind. Cameron and Lucy are about to get married in a month. Wow. And sometimes I hear people in our culture say, well, your family's growing. I'm like, I get it. I'm going to get to enjoy Lucy as a daughter-in-law, and that's wonderful. But really, no. Cameron's leaving my family and starting a new family. That's the goal. The goal is eternity, but here in the immediate sense, the goal is him leaving. So I should parent with the end in mind from day one. I need to prepare for July 29th. I got to prepare. Getting the date right is a very good start. Prepare for July 29th when he's no longer in our immediate family. He becomes a new family with Lucy. There's a leaving and a cleaving. So Steve's lesson last week, Psalm 127. And the Psalm 127 starts with, unless the Lord builds the house, those who build it in vain. And it's talking about families. Unless your house, your home is built on the Lord, what an exercise in futility. And then it goes on in verse 3 that Steve covered last week. Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord. The fruit of the womb is a reward. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior, so are the children of one's youth. Happy is the man who has a quiver full of them. We are going to be launching Cameron into the world very, very shortly. Shannon and I hope we've given him the direction and the momentum to start off right. So there are some things we need to do as parents to prepare for us launching that arrow into the world. Where's Matthew? He went to the teen class. I thought he was 20. Oh, he's helping Kevin. Okay, all that stuff I was going to say about Matthew in front of him will now be null and void. So I'll just skip it. Okay. This isn't in the chapter. I haven't gotten to the chapter yet, so we'll see how we do. But Judges, I love this. There are 4 chapters in the Bible on Samson. One of the 4 just talk about his parents. That's interesting, I thought. And so we have the first 13, chapter 13, we're introduced to Manoah and his wife. And I love this verse. Then Manoah prayed to the Lord and said, "O my Lord, please let the man of God whom you sent come to us again and teach us, what shall we do for the child who will be born?" And God listened to the voice of Manoah. What a great start as a parent. Let's start. These are principles we all know. We're just trying to keep us focused. But what a great start as a parent, not going to the world for parenting advice. Start with God. What an important decision he made. Okay, so those that went to Honduras, if you wanted to climb the tallest mountain in the world, what would it be? Everest? That's Perry's opinion. Is it an opinion, Perry? It's an opinion. He admits it. Anybody else? So in Honduras, I was watching a video and I learned that yes, we all assume Everest is the tallest mountain in the world if we want to climb it, but that assumes something. It assumes your perspective. Your perspective is from sea level. The other 2 mountains in the picture, the one in the right upper corner, that's the mountain Hawaii sits on. Much, much larger than Everest if you assume the point of view that you're measuring it from the base of the mountain and not sea level. And then the one in the right lower corner is also stakes claim to the tallest mountain in the world. And in fact, if you use that point of view, that reference point, Everest is in 10th place. Mount Chimborazo in Ecuador is the tallest mountain in the world if your perspective is from the center of the earth or closest to the moon, because the earth is not perfectly spherical. At the equator, it's bulged out several thousand feet, so it's got a head start. So again, it's a teaching point that I found was, I did a Devo on this basically because I said that's just a teaching point. Everyone wants to climb the highest mountain in life. The world says these are the highest peaks of life. And we have to say, no, what is your reference point? What are you speaking of? It has to be God. So let's talk briefly about what the primary goal of parenting is not. Why are we raising our kids? It should not be the primary objective, happiness. What happens if happiness becomes our target day in, day out? What happens to that child? A self-centered mentality. If we put our kid on a pedestal, which seems to be a common theme of the world, right? That seems to be a virtue. Unusually so. They're going to have an inflated ego, right? Anybody else?
That's what breeds this entitlement society.
We all know that word. It's a buzzword. It's entitlement syndrome. So if we have given our kids everything they ask for, we spoiled them, we've given them this inflated ego, what happens when suffering comes along? They won't know how to deal with it. They have no coping skills if we've done nothing but just try to give them something. Just give them what they want. Happiness is relative, correct, yes.
And when you go through adversity, you learn to appreciate the happiness as it comes, because adversity is going to happen. Nobody gets through life without getting punched in the face, so to speak, sometimes literally. But when you go through trials and stuff, and you grow from it, you appreciate smaller things. And then when you help people, happiness is almost a byproduct.
Yes, Curtis says we will get punched in the face in life, and happiness isn't the goal. Happiness is great. We should enjoy those moments and thank God for them, but that's not the goal. The goal is not good behavior. I'm just going to list a few. We don't have time to go over all the wrong mountains the world is trying to get our kids to climb. But sometimes parents can be hyper-focused on just behavior. And, I think that sends a message to a child if all my dad cares about is how I act in public and my behavior. Maybe missing the point. Maybe it's teaching the kid he just doesn't want me to embarrass him. I guess that's the goal. But really, the goal, I found this, it wasn't in the book, but I found it somewhere, and I thought it would be good sharing. Actions are the visible part of what we see in our children, but we need to care more about what's below the tip of the iceberg there, the actions. We need to care about their values. Why are they acting that way? What do they think is important that's making them act that way? And then below that, ultimately, is their beliefs, their faith system. And so we as parents need to make sure that it's far more than just getting the right action out of our kids, because it matters what you do alone, and it matters what you do when you leave the home. We need to be constantly targeting what's below the actions, what's the value system that they have, and below that, what belief system led to the value system. Comments? Luke 6:45 reads, "A good man out of the good treasure of his heart brings forth good, and an evil man out of the evil treasure of his heart brings forth evil, for out of the abundance of the heart his mouth speaks." God cares about the heart. God cares about the motivation behind our actions much more than the actions themselves. The goal is not being a friend. What can happen if parenting is hyper-focused on just being a good buddy to your kid and you're not pointed in the right direction? Right? You don't discipline a friend. So you don't teach that submission. There's a role there, right? When a child's born, they are 100% dependent on the parent. And gradually, that number starts to fade. And we're hoping that as Cameron launches, that we don't know if it's going to be 5%. I don't know. I'm feeling it out. I have no idea how much parenting, what kind of help he's going to need. But I'm also trying to hold back and wanting to help him too much. I want to let him figure it out. I'm there for him, but I don't want to be the guy that, let me just pay your rent. Let me pay your blah, 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 blah. I need to launch him correctly. And
I've always heard if you're a good parent early on, you can be a friend later.
nothing wrong with being a friend of our kids. I certainly hope that, my parents, or that I'm a friend to Cameron and Matthew and Tate in their, as they age, but that's not my primary goal. My goal is not what the world says. The goal is not just getting them baptized. So when I asked the class, I said, what are some goals? Nobody in here said get them baptized. I think it's because y'all understand that's wonderful. I want my kids to be baptized, but that's just the starting point. If that's our goal, is getting them baptized, and then I'm done, we may have just produced a lukewarm Christian, right? The church of Laodicea in Revelation 3. We want our kids to seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness in every situation, like Lori said, every situation. We want them to be grounded. We can't just be worried about getting them baptized. That's just the starting point. Jesus warned of that. Matthew 15, these people draw near to me with their mouth and honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. And then the church at Laodicea. Baptism of our children is a wonderful mile marker, but only the beginning. The job of Christian parents is to make it as easy as possible for their children to live and die as Christians. Let's face it, baptism is the relatively easy part.
Hey, Eddie,
Sir?
I think the goal, especially with rearing children, and I appreciate the fact this is being brought out, it's not just about baptizing them, it's about discipling your children. And that's the root of discipline, and that just carries the idea of teaching, training, educating them. That's a broad term. That's all of the things that would include all of that training. And sometimes it is what we consider discipline, on the discipline end of things, but it's about discipleship. We're teaching them to be disciples, and it's the same thing as the Great Commission, and that's the same thing we do as parents. We're trying to teach them to be able to go out and be pleasing to God, ultimately, and do all those very same things. And that's how we influence and train and disciple others around us in the gospel as well.
Very good, Wayne. So Wayne points out that the Great Commission, the goal is to make disciples. Yes, baptism is definitely the first step in that, but making disciples or followers of Christ is the goal. and we must not lose sight of it. And just to pause here, a lot of us in this room don't have kids living in our home anymore. The Great Commission starts in the home, but a lot of us have never had kids. Maybe we're grandparents. This lesson is for everyone here because we all can remember the times when we were young when somebody in our church family encouraged us. I think it would be great if every adult here picked a youth every time the doors are open and say, I'm going to target this person today, and I'm going to encourage them in some way. Everybody. If everybody did that, how much stronger will our kids be? When they're getting encouragement from an enormous church family instead of some isolated individuals. We got to remember, when we encourage an 8-year-old in some way, in some meaningful way, in an intentional way, we're serving God. We're serving Christ, right? The Matthew 26 principle. We all have a role in these kids. Yes, Harold?
If we don't teach the kids and get them interested in this, the odds is we're going to die before they are. And if we don't get them interested in this, then this church is going to die. You've got to have that carry on.
Harold reminds us that there's an urgency to this. We need to act on, today's a great day. Start encouraging a youth. Say something. Say something positive.
Eddie, one thing I've always said is a lot of times our children don't listen to us, the parents. So like Lindsay and Will's kids, sometimes I'll encourage them, tell them how good they behave to church because sometimes they don't, I guess probably don't care what the parents think. Especially my children in middle school, we're done, we don't know anything. But they might listen to somebody else.
Yes, sometimes our kids don't listen to us the same way they listen to somebody else. We could say the exact same thing and to be taken totally different, or it was just in one ear out the other when we said it, and when somebody else says it, like, wow, that makes a lot of sense. I'm like, I just said that. But that's okay. That's why it takes a village, right? So let's remember how valuable our little seeds are when we encourage a child. When I was a little kid growing up in a small church in Ohio, people would write me a little encouraging note and I'd save them. And for years, I would go back and I'd pull them out and get encouragement from that little comment, that little note. And I probably still have it at home, somewhere, but I haven't seen it in decades. Very good points. Sometimes don't you wish we could just change the world and influence the world? In parenting, we can. We are affecting the future of the church, like Harold said. When we invest in these kids, we're investing and impacting the future of the world. What a responsibility. So what should the goal be? Again, these are reminders. We all know these principles. Jesus said to him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. John 14:6. What's the goal? The Father. Erica said one of the goals is to get him to heaven, and I'm all for that. But ultimately, the goal is the Father. Now, heavens happens to be where he's at, right? And that's so it's going to be awesome if God the Father's there. But the goal, Jesus reminds us, is the Father. Be unified with him, united with him for eternity. So if that's the goal, how should that affect our speech day in and day out? Talk about the Father every day? Right. And Deuteronomy talks about that. When you wake up, talk about God. At lunchtime, talk about God. When you're driving down the road, talk about God. When you're going to bed, talk about God. Steve asked those of us that went to Honduras, where did you see God today? What a great question for a parent to ask a kid every night. That, Harold?
Are you not up there doing what you're doing right now? And I can't tell you who that somebody
You're talking about me personally. I'm here teaching a class because somebody else invested in me. Without a doubt. My parents are here. I'm blessed with, I was in jail this week. I came out wrong. I was doing jail ministry this week. Let me say that again. I was in jail ministry this week, internet. And I had just read some horrible stats about, this is from the government, so the source, consider the source, about what happens with fatherless homes. It is horrifying. Just Google it and see what the stats are if a child is brought up without a father, of what their future is statistically likely to be. And so I asked guys, and there was 10 or 11 inmates there, how many of you grew up without a father? I think all but 2 hands went up there. I was not shocked at all. I had 2 parents, and I told them that. I said, I have a hard time relating because I didn't walk your walk. But this just shows you the impact parenting has.
And you talk about encouraging the young people. I think it's just as important to encourage the parents as well. This is kind of a self-serving comment, but as a father of 2 young kids, it's always encouraging to me when somebody comes up and says, "Hey, you're going to take how you get to do it." It can be hard. You see people that have 2, even just 1 little kid, 1, 2, 3 small children. They're trying to bring them to church, and they know they're being disruptive, and they know that everybody can hear them, but they're trying to do the right thing. I try to teach their kids the right way, and then when somebody comes up to you to tell you how good of a job you're doing, that just really moves your spirit. So it's important to encourage the children. I think it's just as important to encourage the parents as well. Keep that going.
Thanks, Jake. That's a wonderful point. Jake said it's important to remember that not only do the kids need encouragement, but we should be very intentional about encouraging the parents because they are fighting. They're like a salmon swimming upstream. The culture is saying go this way, and they're trying to go the other way. And we take, like Tate said, I take trees for granted in the car yesterday. Well, we take good parents for granted in the church. We need to be very purposeful and say, Jake, I know you know this, but great job. Brian, Fiona was Miss TCC at camp last week. That's a great deal. That's awesome. Because that means all the counselors at camp saw Fiona as being a special light. Pretty awesome. So we need to, say, Brian, good job. Not just good job, Fiona, which is awesome. But we should say to Valerie and Brian, you're doing something right. Good job. Good. Thank you, Jake. That was very wise. Matthew 25, verse 21. His Lord said to him, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord." Again, what's our target in parenting? Our kids to hear that. That's the parable of the talent, right? We all want to hear that. We want our parents to hear that. And I just love the phrase, enter into the joy of your Lord. You know what's one way to make God the Father joyful? Show up on Judgment Day and be there for eternity with Him. That's entering into His joy. He's going to be thrilled to show you what He's prepared for you. Wow, I want my kid to hear that. I want to hear that.
And happiness, I think, is something that we also should try to teach our children. You may not feel happy right now while I'm making you do chores, but you need to find the joy in doing chores. Where is that joy? Maybe it's not a smile on a table, but it's still an emotion that you can feel by doing what you're doing.
Erica says there's a difference between happiness and joy. You can find joy everywhere, even in a chore, even in suffering. Acts 16 comes to mind. Paul and Silas in jail, they just gotten their back slashed. What are they doing? Singing. And everyone in the jail is like, I want some of that. the goal. 2 Corinthians 5, 9 through 10. Therefore, we make it our aim, whether to be present or absent, to be well-pleasing to him. For we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, that each one may receive the things done in the body according to what he has done, whether good or bad. Judgment's coming. Let's keep eternity in view. The purpose of life is preparing for eternity. So we should talk a lot about that with our kids. I don't think I've talked to my kids near enough about some of these principles. 1 Corinthians 10:31, whatever you do, whatever you eat, whatever you drink, whatever you do, do to the glory of God. Everything needs to be on target. It's hard to prepare a lesson like this and sit there going, I wish I'd have done this different. I wish I'd have done that different. It's just, that's the way the scriptures are. They're going to hit you in the face sometimes. Joshua, I love, a lot of us have this quote hanging in our house, Joshua 24:15. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. There's a determined parent that is going to stay on target. Even, we all know Joshua and Caleb, even though the world's saying this, they're like, no, that's not the goal. That's not the target. I'm going to stick on point even when I'm the only one. Philippians 2, 4 through 5, let each of you look out not only for his own interest, but also for the interest of others. Let this mind be in you that was also in Christ Jesus. Parent with the interest of our children at heart. Psalm 78 reads, verse 1, give ear, O my people, to my law. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark sayings of old, which we have heard and known, and our fathers have told us. We will not hide them from their children, telling the generation to come the praises of the Lord and his strength and his wonderful works that he has done. For he established a testimony in Jacob and appointed a law in Israel, which he commanded our fathers, that they should make them known to their children, that the generation to come might know them, the children who would be born, that they may arise and declare them to their children, that they may set their hope in God and not forget the works of God, but keep his commandments. Kind of what Erica says, we got to inject God. If our goal is the Father, talk about the Father in our daily language. How important it is to have that on our lips daily. And you get into this routine of life where day goes by and you just in kind of robot autopilot mode, but wake up with an intention. I'm going to inject God into these conversations. Sometimes I'll out of just exercise for myself, before I go in a room, I'll say a quick prayer. I say, Lord, give me an opportunity to glorify you. And then I go in that room saying, I'm going to figure a way to inject a conversation about God to this conversation about this rash. And sometimes it's hard. Do you know poison ivy? Isn't God great? It's like he created all of this. What are some good habits we could help our kids develop? Yes, it's the obvious. I'm asking for you to state the obvious. This stuff is obvious, but we get away from it in our day-to-day life. We need to get back to doing the obvious, stating the obvious, that we need to speak and remind ourselves daily of this need to constantly inject God into our conversations because our kids need to hear it. What are some good habits?
Praying and Bible reading. I got each of the kids a devotional book, and on their
Daily Bible reading, praying with your kids, wonderful. Anybody else?
Teach them ways of how they can apply the scripture into the state of mind, the phase that they're in.
Just teaching them biblical principles in the moment. Like if something pops up, somebody's angering you, well, Romans 12 says, return evil with kindness. You know, maybe we shouldn't respond like that. We're told to respond this way instead. Very good. There's so many benefits that come from raising children in the Lord. John 10:10, Jesus tells us, yes, we're going to have eternal life, but we're going to have life more abundantly now. There's a benefit. When we obey the law, it's good for us now. It can lengthen our lives if we obey the Lord. It's for our good when we obey the Lord. In Proverbs 29:18, when we keep the law, we can be happy. Your days will be prolonged. I mean, there's so many benefits now. We can teach these principles to our kids and give them an example. Well, how is that true, Dad? It says if you obey the law of God, you can live longer. Okay. Give them an example. What about teaching them about gluttony? Teaching them about and how that could lead to poor health. Teaching them about being sober-minded, sober always. You can see the benefits there, right? I don't think we have time for that. So important to portray God accurately by our example. How will our child's concepts about God be impacted if we are too harsh, too demanding, too negative, or unforgiving? Will they be more or less likely to aim to please God if that is their concept of God? God designed this. When our 3-year-old sees us behave, it's supposed to be a reflection of Him. So we need to practice, because we're made in the image of God and we're supposed to be a reflection of Him. How we respond to things will give them an early concept of what God is. And it may be wrong, a wrong concept. So we need to catch ourselves. Number 2, what if we are inconsistent and undependable? Will that reflect on their trust in God as they get older? If we are over-merciful, fail to punish when they grow up feeling we are weak, how will that impact their view of God? The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. A healthy reverence and fear of parents is important, just like it is of God. You're not going to obey the laws of the land if you don't fear the police, if you don't fear the laws of the land, right? If we spoil our kids and try to keep them from all pain and suffering rather than teaching them how to cope, how will that affect their view of God? We'll end on this slide. I thought it was interesting. And I'd never made the connection to parenting, but what were the 3 things in the Ark of the Covenant? The manna, the stone tablets, and Aaron's rod that budded. And the book kind of made a connection I hadn't made to parenting, in that looked at the way God behaved as the father to the nation of Israel in these 3 symbols. Number 1, manna. It represented His physical provision. That's our job as parents, right? Number 2, the stone tablets represented spiritual provision through the Word. That's also an important role as parents. And number 3, Aaron's rod that budded. What would that represent? Tate would probably say, fishing. Let's go fish. No, it represents God's correction, guidance, and protection. So I thought that's a good way to end. Think about what God valued and why He put those symbols in the Ark of the Covenant. And that maybe should give us 3 principles of parenting that we're responsible for, that we should make sure we reflect so that they see that part of God in us. Ephesians 5:1 says, be imitators of God. This would be a great place to start as parents. Thank you.